Did you just lay hands on my wife? The words cut through the hush of the mark like a blade through glass. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks hovered in the air. Somewhere in the corner, a champagne cork popped, but no one turned to look. It was as if the entire dining room had frozen in place. Moments earlier, Maya Brooks had been sitting quietly at table 7, a glass of sparkling water in front of her, waiting for her husband to return from a quick business call. She wasn't loud. She wasn't making a scene. She was simply existing. But in the eyes of Victoria Pierce, the restaurant's perfectly pressed, pearl necklace-wearing manager, that was already too much. "People like you don't belong here," Victoria had said, her voice dripping with disdain, loud enough for the tables on either side to hear. Maya's answer was calm, deliberate. "I belong wherever dignity is the dress code." And then, in a moment that would ignite a storm across the country, Victoria's manicured hand whipped through the air and landed on Maya's cheek with a sharp, echoing crack. The sound bounced off marble and glass like a pistol shot. Maya didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She simply sat there, her warm brown eyes fixed on Victoria as if memorizing every detail of this moment. Across the room, a diner's phone camera light blinked red, recording. Seconds later, the 6'2" figure of Jordan Brooks, billionaire tech CEO, cut across the floor like a storm rolling in off the Atlantic. His green eyes locked on Victoria, his jaw tight enough to crack granite. "Did you just lay hands on my wife?" he repeated, quieter this time, but somehow even more dangerous. The question wasn't just for Victoria. It was for everyone in the room holding their breath, for every person who had ever witnessed injustice and wondered what they would do when their moment came. And in the silence that followed, as cameras rolled in the world outside, Upper East Side luxury remained blissfully unaware. One thing was already certain. This night at the Mark was about to become headline news. The Mark restaurant by Jean Georges sat on the corner of Madison Avenue and 77th Street like a cathedral to New York luxury. Polished brass doors framed in black lacquer opened to a world of white tablecloths, crystal stemware, and the faint scent of truffle and rosemary drifting from the kitchen. The lighting was warm, a carefully calculated glow that made diamonds sparkle and champagne gleam gold. It was the kind of place where the host knew the names of hedge fund managers, Hollywood producers, and political donors before they even gave them. Tonight, table 7 near the tall street-facing windows was reserved for Maya and Jordan Brooks. She had arrived on his arm just 40 minutes earlier, slipping out of the back seat of a black Escalade and into the lobby with her usual quiet confidence. At 28, Maya had a kind of beauty that did not need designer labels to announce itself. Smooth brown skin that seemed lit from within, almond-shaped eyes that held warmth and intelligence, and the kind of posture that spoke of self-respect more than self-importance. Her dress tonight was simple, a well-tailored navy sheath that skimmed her figure without trying to compete with the gowns glittering elsewhere in the room. A delicate silver necklace rested at her collarbone, a gift from Jordan on their second anniversary. Jordan Brooks, 35, was the kind of man who drew a second look even in a city that had seen it all. 6'2", broad-shouldered, with a clean-shaven jaw and eyes the green of a summer storm. He was the founder and CEO of Vertex Wave, a cloud infrastructure giant with contracts that touched almost every Fortune 500 company. Yet those who knew him well would tell you that his greatest asset was not his business empire, but the way he treated the woman sitting across from him. Before tonight took its turn, their evening had been ordinary in the best way. They had ordered sparkling water, shared an appetizer of lobster tartare, and talked about their plans for the weekend. When his phone buzzed with an urgent call from the Tokyo office, Jordan had leaned in, kissed her on the cheek, and said he would be back in 5 minutes. And so, Maya found herself alone at table 7, idly watching the flicker of candlelight on crystal, unaware that in just a few moments she would become the center of a storm that would leave no corner of this restaurant untouched. Maya noticed the shift before she understood it. From the corner of her eye, she caught a flash of movement. A tall woman in a fitted black suit, her hair swept into a tight chignon, moving across the dining room with the purposeful stride of someone who had already made up her mind. The slight ripple in the air was the kind of thing you feel before you hear. Conversations dimmed just a fraction. A waiter glanced up and then quickly away. The woman stopped at the edge of table 7. Maya looked up politely, expecting perhaps a question about her order. Instead, she was met with a smile so tight it looked painted on. "Good evening," the woman said, her tone carrying the brittle edge of a reprimand. "I am Victoria Pierce, the manager here. I believe there may have been a mix-up with this table." Maya blinked once. A mix-up? Yes. Victoria's gaze swept over the table setting, then over Maya herself, lingering a beat too long. This section is reserved for our distinguished clientele. I am sure you understand. Sometimes guests are seated incorrectly. The words were wrapped in politeness, but the meaning was naked. Maya felt it land. She set her water glass down carefully, her fingers steady. This is the table my husband reserved. I am exactly where I am supposed to be. Victoria's smile faltered. Your husband? She glanced toward the lounge, where Jordan was still on his call. I see. And what is his name? Mr. Jordan Brooks. Maya's voice was calm, clear. A flicker of recognition passed over Victoria's face, but it was gone as quickly as it came. I was not aware Mr. Brooks would be dining with a guest tonight. A guest? Maya asked, tilting her head slightly. Yes, Victoria said, lowering her voice in a way that somehow carried farther. We have an image to maintain. Our regular patrons expect a certain standard in presentation. Around them, Forks paused midair. A man in a navy blazer leaned subtly toward his companion, whispering. Maya caught the words, not the usual look, before the noise of the room swallowed them. I belong wherever dignity is the dress code, Maya said evenly. Victoria's eyes hardened. Of course. Still, perhaps you would be more comfortable at a different table. Something less abysmal. It was a suggestion wrapped as a command. And it was the moment the air between them began to thicken, the pressure building toward something neither of them could take back. Victoria did not wait for Maya to respond. She straightened her posture, turned slightly so her voice would carry to the nearby tables, and spoke with a kind of measured volume that sounded polite on the surface but was meant to be overheard. Mrs. Brooks, she began, deliberately using the title as though it needed confirmation. The Mark has worked for decades to cultivate an atmosphere of sophistication. We do have certain expectations, visual expectations, for our guests in the main dining area. A woman at the next table glanced over, eyebrows raised. A man 2 seats down set his wine glass aside, watching with thinly veiled interest. Maya could feel the shift in the room, the subtle tightening of focus, as though the evening's entertainment had just been announced. Victoria's gaze flicked to Maya's navy dress and back to her face. You see, some guests, especially those joining us for the first time, aren't always aware of the unspoken dress code. We make allowances, of course, but only to a point. Maya's spine remained straight. And which point would that be? Victoria gave a small, dismissive laugh. The point where it begins to reflect on the restaurant's image. Our regulars notice when something stands out. A few diners shifted in their seats, pretending to focus on their plates while their ears leaned into the conversation. Maya saw one man whisper to his date, who smirked and glanced her way. The heat rising in her cheeks had nothing to do with embarrassment. It was the quiet anger of being judged in public for daring to exist outside someone else's shallow parameters. I assure you, Maya said evenly, my presence here will not harm your image. On the contrary, Victoria replied, her tone sharpening. Our image is why I must ask again if you would be more comfortable at a less prominent table, perhaps near the side entrance, where it's quieter. It was no longer a suggestion. It was a relocation order dressed up in courtesy. And by phrasing it in front of half the dining room, Victoria had ensured that saying no would turn this moment into a spectacle. From across the room, Maya caught sight of Chef Daniel Wu standing half-hidden in the kitchen doorway, his expression unreadable but his eyes locked on the scene. Somewhere else, a phone screen tilted upward, recording now, not just watching. Maya let the silence hang for a heartbeat longer than necessary. This table is fine, she said at last, her voice carrying just enough to reach the eavesdropping crowd. It was a refusal, and with it, the tension in the air thickened like a summer storm rolling toward the city. Something was about to break. For a long moment, it was just the two of them, Maya seated, calm and upright, Victoria looming over the table like a shadow that had grown too large. The quiet clink of silverware from across the dining room felt distant, muffled, as if the air between them was absorbing sound. Then Victoria leaned in, her voice low enough to sound private, but her words sharp enough to cut the room in two. I am trying to give you the chance to leave without making this worse. Maya met her gaze without flinching. There is nothing to make worse. I am sitting at my table, minding my own business. Something in that answer, its calmness, its refusal to yield, seemed to snap a hidden wire inside Victoria. She straightened, her jaw tight, and for a split second her eyes darted to the tables around them, as if confirming that she still had an audience. And then, with no further warning, her right hand came up fast and hard. The sound of palm meeting cheek cracked through the restaurant like a starter pistol. A sharp, hollow pop that made every conversation stop. A fork clattered to a plate somewhere near the bar. A champagne flute trembled on its stem. Maya's head tilted slightly from the force, but she didn't raise a hand to defend herself. Instead, she took a slow breath, lifted her eyes to meet Victoria's again, and said clearly, "Thank you for showing everyone exactly who you are." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The room was suspended in a kind of stunned paralysis. Diners stared openly now. No more pretense of discretion. At least 2 cell phones were held chest-high, cameras rolling. Near the kitchen doorway, Chef Daniel Wu took a step forward, his face dark with disbelief. Closer to the windows, an older gentleman, Henry Collins, pushed his chair back, the scrape of wood on tile cutting through the silence. "I saw everything," he announced, his voice carrying to the far wall. The words seemed to ricochet through the stillness, breaking whatever spell had settled over the room. Whispers began to spread like a ripple from the center outward. Some voices were sympathetic. Others sounded more like curiosity, tinged with gossip. Victoria's hand dropped back to her side, but her chin stayed high. The red mark on Maya's cheek was already blooming, a vivid testament to what had just happened. And in that fragile suspended moment, the front doors of the mark swung open, and Jordan Brooks stepped back into the dining room. Jordan's stride across the dining room was deliberate, each step heavy enough to be heard even over the nervous shuffle of diners adjusting in their chairs. At 6'2", with broad shoulders filling out a tailored charcoal suit, he didn't need to raise his voice to command the room's attention. But when he reached table 7 and saw the flush blooming on Maya's cheek, his expression shifted from confusion to a kind of quiet, controlled fury. He looked directly at Victoria. "Did you just lay hands on my wife?" The question landed like a gavel strike. Conversations that had started up again died instantly. Victoria opened her mouth, then closed it, her confidence flickering for the first time that night. "Mr. Brooks," she began. "There was a misunderstanding." "Good," Jordan cut in, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Then it will be easy to clear up. We will need to review the security footage. Now." A ripple went through the crowd. At a table by the window, a man discreetly lowered his phone, as if suddenly aware that what he was recording might end up in court. Jordan didn't break eye contact with Victoria as he gestured toward the nearest server. "Please bring the manager on duty. If that is you, then you'll want to call whoever has access to your camera system. And while you're at it, get me your corporate customer policy manual." The request wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. His tone made it clear that these weren't suggestions. Henry Collins stepped forward from his table. "I can save you some time," he said, voice steady. "I witnessed the entire incident. Your wife was seated quietly. The only aggression came from Ms. Pierce here." Chef Daniel Wu emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. "That's correct," he added. "I saw her approach without provocation." Victoria's smile returned, but it was thinner now. "They're exaggerating." I felt threatened by her tone. Jordan's jaw tightened. Threatened by a woman sitting alone, drinking water, waiting for her husband. He glanced at the glowing phone in Ava Reynolds' hand, the red record icon still pulsing. "I assume you've got the whole thing?" Ava nodded. From the first words she spoke to the moment she struck her. Jordan looked back at Victoria, his voice even lower now. "Then we won't have to rely on memory. The evidence will speak for itself." Around them, the air seemed to contract, the weight of certainty settling over the room. The rules had just shifted, and Jordan was making it clear they were no longer playing by hers. Jordan stayed standing beside Maya, his presence a wall between her and the woman who had just assaulted her. The hum of the dining room was gone now, replaced by the sound of people holding their breath. "You know what the real problem is here," Jordan said, his voice measured. "It's not a misunderstanding about reservations. It's not a question of presentation or image. It's about the idea that some people deserve respect and others don't. That's what we're going to talk about." Victoria shifted on her heels. "Mr. Brooks, this isn't the place." "This is exactly the place," Jordan cut in. "Because it happened right here, in front of everyone. And I want every single person in this room to hear this." He turned to the surrounding tables, scanning the faces of diners who had been pretending not to watch. My wife, Maya Brooks, is a respected advocate for education reform. She's worked with underserved communities across the country, building programs to improve literacy rates. She's testified before state committees on education funding. She's been invited to the White House for her work. And tonight, she was judged not by her accomplishments, not by her character, but by the cut of her dress and the shade of her skin. Maya kept her gaze steady, her hands folded in her lap, but her chest rose and fell a little quicker now. I have every right to be here, she said, her voice clear and unshaken. Not because of who I'm married to, not because of what I've done for a living, but because every paying guest here has the same rights. You don't get to take those away because they don't fit your idea of what belongs. Henry Collins nodded from his table. In 50 years of dining in the city, I've never seen a guest treated like this for wearing a simple dress. It's disgraceful. Chef Daniel Wu added quietly but firmly, the way we treat people says more about us than the menu ever could. Jordan's eyes returned to Victoria. The law is very clear about this. You can't refuse service or mistreat someone based on race, gender, or perceived social status. Those are rights. And rights don't depend on whether you like the person in front of you. There was no raised voice, no table pounding. Just the steady force of truth, laid out where everyone could hear it. And from the looks on the faces around the room, the truth was landing exactly where it needed to. Victoria's face shifted into something colder, more calculated. She glanced toward the host stand, where a younger employee stood frozen with a tablet in his hands. With a barely perceptible nod, she sent him moving toward her. Evan, she said, her voice suddenly louder for the benefit of those listening, pull up the notes from the reservation system. Let's verify the record for Mr. Brooks' table tonight. Evan hesitated, flicking his eyes toward Jordan and Maya before tapping at the screen. It's right here, he said quietly. Table 7. Reserved under Jordan Brooks. 2 guests. Victoria didn't miss a beat. And what about the call earlier this afternoon? She pressed. Didn't we have a complaint about a guest causing a disturbance in the lobby? Maya's brows drew together. What are you talking about? Victoria's tone turned syrupy, as if she were explaining something unfortunate to a child. We take reports very seriously. One of our front desk staff said a woman matching your description became aggressive when asked to confirm her reservation. I simply wanted to make sure this was the same person before escalating things further. The tactic was obvious. Plant a seed of doubt, create a false history, make the victim look like the problem. Jordan stepped in before anyone else could speak. That's a lie. We walked straight from the ballet to our table. There was no disturbance, no argument, nothing. Victoria shrugged, feigning innocence. I'm only repeating what was reported. Our staff has no reason to fabricate. Henry Collins' voice cut through the room. Except to protect a manager who just struck a guest in front of half the dining room. A ripple of agreement moved through the tables. Someone near the bar muttered, unbelievable, while another diner shook her head in disbelief. Jordan turned to Evan. Son, you were here when we arrived, weren't you? Evan looked uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot. Yes, sir. I seated you myself. There was no disturbance. That single confirmation was enough to puncture the lie. A low murmur spread across the room, no longer whispering but openly condemning what they were hearing. Maya's voice was quiet, but it carried. If this is how you try to erase what you've done, by making up stories about the person you hurt, you've just told everyone here exactly what kind of manager you are. Victoria's lips pressed into a thin line. The smear attempt had backfired, and from the way the diners were looking at her now, she knew it. Maya had sat through the entire exchange with the same steady posture, her shoulders square, her chin lifted just enough to show she wasn't going to be bowed. But inside, the steady drumbeat of adrenaline was starting to take its toll. Her heart thudded harder now, her palms tingled, and there was a faint ringing in her ears that made it hard to hear the softer noises in the room. She had been here before. Not in this exact place, not in the mark with champagne glasses trembling on linen, but in situations where she was being tested in public, her composure weighed against someone else's cruelty. It never got easier. No matter how many times you tell yourself to rise above it, the body has its own response. And right now, hers was telling her to either get up and walk out or to stand and shout until the walls shook. Jordan's presence beside her was steadying, but it also made the pressure worse. She didn't want to be the reason his evening turned into a headline. She didn't want to give Victoria the satisfaction of seeing her lose control. Still, the image of that hand coming across the table played in her mind on a loop, each replay sharpening the humiliation like a blade. Her fingers curled lightly around the stem of her water glass. She thought about taking a sip, anything to give her hands something to do besides clench. But the truth was, her throat was too tight for swallowing. She could feel the weight of every eye in the room pressing on her, the invisible pull that demanded she either break down or break out. Jordan leaned closer, his voice low enough for her alone. "You're still in control," he said. "Don't let her take that from you." The words caught something inside her. A reminder. A lifeline. She inhaled slowly through her nose, letting the air expand her lungs, letting the oxygen slow the pounding in her chest. She straightened a fraction more, releasing the water glass and folding her hands in her lap again. When she finally spoke, her voice wasn't as loud as Victoria's or as commanding as Jordan's, but it was hers, steady, clear, and unshaken. "I'm not leaving," she said. It wasn't just a refusal to move tables anymore. It was a refusal to be moved at all, by fear, by shame, or by the lie that she didn't belong here. And with that, the crack inside her began to close, sealing over with something harder than before. Jordan placed a gentle hand on Maya's shoulder before turning to face the room. There was a calm finality in his movements, the kind that made people lean forward without realizing it. "Victoria," he said evenly, "you've made 2 mistakes tonight. The first was thinking you could treat my wife this way without consequence. The second was assuming you knew who you were dealing with." He reached into his inside jacket pocket and pulled out a slim leather portfolio. It wasn't flashy, but when he opened it, the room seemed to tilt in his direction. He withdrew a single folded document and placed it carefully on the table between them. "This," he said, tapping the page, "is the acquisition agreement I signed 3 weeks ago. As of the end of this quarter, my holding company will own controlling interest in the Mark Restaurant Group, this location included." A collective intake of breath moved through the dining room. Even the clink of silverware from the far corner stopped. "That means," Jordan continued, "that in less than 30 days, I will be your boss's boss. And on that day, I will have the authority to decide exactly what kind of people represent this brand. I can promise you now, it will not be the kind of people who slap paying guests and fabricate complaints to cover themselves." Victoria's eyes widened, a flicker of panic breaking through her composure for the first time. "You own the Mark?" Jordan didn't smile. "Soon. And when I do, every security camera, every witness statement, and every video recorded here tonight will be reviewed in front of the entire executive board." From the bar, a woman holding her phone said loudly, "I already posted it. It's trending." A few heads turned toward her, and she shrugged unapologetically. "People have a right to know." Jordan let that settle before speaking again. "You wanted me to move my wife to a less visible table. Instead, you've made her the most visible person in this building, and soon, in the country." Maya looked up at him then, not with surprise, but with the quiet understanding of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't just about personal vengeance. It was about drawing a line in public, one no one would dare cross again. And as the murmurs swelled into open conversation, the realization spread. This night would not be contained within these walls. By morning, it would be everywhere. The shift was almost physical, like a change in air pressure. One moment, the room was tense and hushed. The next, voices rose in waves as the story began to move faster than anyone could control. Diners who had been silent witnesses now spoke openly, recounting details to each other, pulling out their phones to share what they'd seen. Within minutes, notifications began to ping from all directions. The woman at the bar scrolled rapidly, her eyes widening. "It's already on 3 news accounts," she said. "The video's at 50,000 views." Victoria's face paled, though she tried to hold her posture. But the murmurs around her were no longer curious. They were accusatory. She could feel the weight of every glance, the silent verdict forming before any formal decision was made. Near the kitchen, Chef Daniel was stepped aside to take a call. His voice was low, but the tension in his shoulders made it clear the call was from someone high up. When he returned, he didn't look at Victoria. Instead, he approached Jordan and Maya. "Corporate just found out," he said quietly. "They're watching the video right now. They'll be calling this location in about 5 minutes." The dominoes were already tipping. A man in a dark blazer at the far table, later identified as a travel blogger with a massive following, was typing furiously on his laptop. His caption would be one of the first to go viral. High-end restaurant manager slaps black woman over image concerns. Her husband owns the chain. Outside, a delivery driver waiting for a pickup peeked in through the glass doors, phone in hand. He'd been live streaming for the last 2 minutes, and the comment feed was moving too fast to read. Victoria glanced toward the exit, as if calculating whether leaving now would make her look better or worse. But she didn't move. It was too late for quiet escapes. Jordan checked his watch, then looked at Maya. "You okay?" She nodded once. "Better than I was 10 minutes ago." The first call came through the host's stand phone. The young host picked up, his voice tentative. "Yes, she's here. Right in front of me." He held the phone out toward Victoria, his expression almost apologetic. As she took the receiver, the entire dining room seemed to hold still again. Everyone knew the voice on the other end wasn't here to offer comfort. This was the sound of accountability arriving. By the time Jordan and Maya stepped out into the cool night air, the restaurant behind them was still buzzing, the energy inside unable to settle. Flashing screens lit up the windows as people scrolled, shared, and commented in real time. Somewhere in that building, Victoria was still on the phone with corporate, her future hanging by a thread she had spun herself. Maya exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders finally starting to ease. Jordan placed his hand over hers as they walked toward the car. "You didn't just hold your ground," he said. "You set a standard." She smiled faintly, but her mind was still turning. It shouldn't have to take ownership papers or a viral video for someone to be treated with basic respect. Jordan nodded. It shouldn't. But sometimes, when the world won't listen to the quiet truth, it takes a loud one. As they drove away, notifications kept coming in, calls from journalists, messages from friends, strangers thanking Maya for standing up when it would have been easier to leave. The story was already more than just a headline. It had become a mirror people were holding up to their own lives, their workplaces, their communities. In the days that followed, the Mark Restaurant Group issued a public statement, confirming that Victoria had been terminated effective immediately. The statement also announced a new diversity and inclusion training initiative across all locations, something Maya insisted on before the dust settled. But the impact went beyond corporate policy. The video sparked nationwide conversations about dignity, bias, and how easy it is to underestimate someone until the truth is laid bare. In community centers, classrooms, and online forums, people were asking the same question: would I have spoken up if I'd been there? For Maya, the lesson wasn't just for the people watching, it was for herself too. She had come close to walking away that night, close to letting anger or humiliation dictate her next move. But she didn't. And that choice reminded her of something she already knew but had almost forgotten. Holding your ground, even when your voice shakes, can change more than just the moment. It can change the conversation for everyone watching. Her takeaway was simple, but it carried weight. Respect is not a privilege handed out at someone else's discretion. It's a right you carry with you into every room, no matter who questions it. And when someone tries to take it, the most powerful thing you can do is stand where you are and say, "I'm not leaving."